The objectives are something different. What do you seek to achieve, right? So you might have several projects, and those several projects might have different objectives. So each project will have specific objectives. So you must define your objectives. So if you are fundraising for general purpose objectives, in other words, let's say you have an institution and you want core support. It means your objectives are going to be coined around the functioning and the effectiveness of your systems, your processes of that particular institution or infrastructure. But with projects, it's very different, because with a project, it's probably a defined, there's a time frame to a project. A project will not run forever. So there's a time frame. Within that time frame, it means you have identified your baselines, where you are today as you are seeking to get this support, and where you want to be at the end of the project. And in between here, you've got moments of reviews, you've got interim results that you are likely to achieve. So by defining your objectives, you are telling the donor that with this project, we seek to achieve the following: 1, 2, 3, or 4. So the airport upgrades, one of the objectives could be to enhance our security, right? So that's one of the objectives. It could be to enhance the security. But it could also be, like you said, you want to facilitate a smooth flow of goods, services, and people, right? So you have to have specific objectives so that you are able to come back and measure how you have achieved them. You have to talk about outcomes. You have to talk about results. You have to talk about potentially impact. I say potentially because a project does not necessarily lead to an impact. An impact is a long-term process. But from a project, you can get outcomes, you can get results. And those results may not necessarily be impact. Impact can happen over time. Many years ago, I used to work for a foundation. We gave a grant to a lady who was, at that point, she wanted to plant a moringa tree. So, she came and asked for a small grant, $25,000 US. We gave her that grant for the foundation that I was working for. It was a once-off project from our end. We forgot about it. At the end of the project, you do your closeout, done. I think 10 or so years later, I read about this lady. She's late now, Mavis Matabata. I read about this lady. She has built a huge business around moringa. She has a farm, she's helping, she has a foundation, she has been recognized internationally and otherwise. And I said, no way, this cannot be the same lady. And it was, so we looked for her. We brought her here actually at this business school to come and talk about her work. Only then did we realize, and she said it, that if it wasn't for the grant that I got so many years ago, none of these big brands would have recognized me. But the startup capital is what made her what she then became. But from an impact point of view, we had actually closed the grant because for us, she had planted trees, that's it. But 10 years down the line, there's moringa tea, moringa juice, there's foundations, there's this, there's that, there's all those things. So that's the impact. So at times, when you apply for funding, don't be so caught up on the impact, especially if it is a project. Know what the impact might be, but focus more on tangibles. The tangible is what you are going to do, is what you are going to see, right, in a specific period of that project. Because the donor would want to align their money with the outcome. The impact will happen later, and if you are lucky to see it, even better. Some people don't even see it. We always talk about planting a tree under whose shade you may not sit. right? That's the nature of development, right? Development is about planting a seed and knowing that you are not going to sit under the shade of that tree, but other people are going to sit under that shade. That's sustainability. But if you want to plant a seed now and sit under the shade, those are serious shortcuts. It's not going to happen. So objectives are very important. Be very clear about defining what your objectives are and how you are going to achieve them. So let's just give the colleagues who are coming in some moments to settle down. Okay, so colleagues, I think this is from Malawi, right? Mulibwanji. Mulibwanji. Hey, Tiribuino. Okay, so I'll try and get you into the picture as we go along. I'll be recapping some of the stuff that we did in the morning for your benefit, and maybe over lunch I can find a way of taking you through. But welcome. So earlier on we talked about identifying markets. Now you would have identified markets earlier. After defining your objectives, after having done the objectives, the needs statement, fundraising is not just about the team that is in your office. So for example, the colleagues from Mauritius were saying the work is done there, the costing there, and then finally the document lands with them, right? And then they are to take it to potential donors. Now, fundraising is really about an ecosystem. Resource mobilization is an ecosystem. Generally, if you are, so let's take SADC as an example. The secretariat would have the executive secretary, the deputy, and all the other people there. And all of them are involved in one form or the other when they are looking for money. But the chief fundraiser will be the executive secretary. That will be the chief fundraiser. But the secretariat, SADC secretariat, has a board, has a council, right? So there's the council of ministers. There's the senior officials, and then there's the summit, right? I hope, I mean, you are member states, so you know all these things, right? What I'm saying is your daily bread, right? Everyone is fine with this, eh? So when you think about fundraising, you think about all the structures that make up an institution. So you have the secretariat, SADC secretariat, there's the executive secretary, the chief fundraiser, but there's the council, there's the summit, there's senior officials, right? In all of those structures, if you're a good fundraiser, you will find a way of involving them in full or partially. You have to involve them in one way or the other. We are going to talk about something called the constituency model. Wherever you are sitting, if you are a government department, you are a ministry, you are a project, you are an NGO, wherever you are sitting, you have a constituency. And your constituency is made up of your staff, your board members, if you've got a board, or council members, people who have attended your activities before, your former board members, your donors, your governance structure, all those form what we call your constituency as an institution. So you look at each and every one of them and say, for this particular fundraising project, who among them can I involve? You involve them for particular reasons. One could be, I want to approach the African Development Bank, but I don't have access. However, one of our structures has direct access, right? So as the chief executive officer of SADC, I then say, okay, the Minister of Finance in Mozambique used to work for the African Development Bank, and he sits on one of these structures. You involve that minister, because then you have got easy access to the donor, right? So that's one way of thinking about it. The other is, okay, you probably want to fundraise from a corporate, and one of your board members is a chief executive officer of one of the big corporates. You may not fundraise from that private sector organization that he is an executive of, but he or she might have influence on other executives, right? So you actually utilize that person in order to have influence on the other side. So you have to involve each and every component of the institution in fundraising, so that the team that is responsible for resource mobilization is a technical team, right? Their work is to make sure that they do the research, they do the write-up of the proposals, they make the presentations, they accompany the CEO or whoever is going to make the ask, right? So the whole responsibility on fundraising or resource mobilization must not sit with your unit. It must be spread across, but you must coordinate it, right? Donors want to meet face-to-face with the leader of an institution. That's what donors want to do. They want to meet face-to-face with the leader of an institution. They want to feel that you actually, what word can I use? Donors want to be massaged, right? They want a good life. And one of the good lives is that you don't send anyone and anyone to a donor. They just want the head of an institution. If not, somebody else. But donors want that particular attention. That's the word I'm looking for. They need attention, right? So involve your board, involve your council members, involve your ministers, involve whoever. So you can substitute any word there based on how you are organized or how you are configured as an institution. But the principle is involve others in fundraising. We move to the next thing, which is now you have to validate your need statement. Remember earlier on we said, what is your need statement? You do some research and everything. But at this point you have to validate it, because you are now clear that you want to go and ask for money. So you need to validate it. And validation can take several forms. Some, it could be through consultations internally. It could be consultations externally. It could be peer reviews. You can have different ways to validate a need statement. You can have experts coming in to sit in to look at what you have produced and telling you this will not fly, this will fly, and so but the principle is, don't go to the donor without having validated your need statement. So, for example, the three of you are from Lesotho, and you said you want to upgrade the airport. That's what she said. You didn't say it. You didn't say it, right? And then, if we were to validate now, would it be that the three of you would say that's what is the most pressing need in Lesotho right now? The upgrade of the airport? You see? Anyway, my point is that we have to make sure that you come back to validate, so that when you go fundraising, you're not going to meet somebody from the same country, meeting the same donor, but asking for a different project. Because that happens, you know. I mean, we heard that in some units or in some institutions, the left might not know what the right is doing, right? It happens. Don't be worried about it. We do it ourselves here at the university. We actually have donors. GIZ is funding at least 2 or 3 projects here at VETS. And until we talk about it, I may not know. I may not know that GIZ is funding another person there. And so we need to find a way of talking internally ourselves to know who is doing what. So in fundraising, you can actually have in the same institution, different arms of the same institution, approaching the same donor but without knowing. And the donor sits there and says that, wait a minute, did you say you're from VETS? Yes. Oh, we had so and so come here, and so on. But different projects. So the point of validation is to make sure that you are all on the same page. There's not going to be any surprises. But it also means that you are validating with the constituency. So for example, if this is meant for the citizens of Lesotho, what are the processes of validating your projects as a government, right? Either through parliamentary processes or whatever, but at least have something that can say you validated this. And then you have to evaluate the gift markets. Earlier on, you would have identified the markets, but right now, this is now the time to now choose ones that you want. So the first one is identifying all the markets that can apply. But at this point, you are now being very clear about the ones that you are going for and why. So you might have 10, 20, but here you are narrowing them down maybe to 3 or 4. Because you also don't want to spread your wings too wide in fundraising. You want to be targeted. Because it's a long journey that you are going to have. There's so much back and forth. Those of you that do this every day, you know there's so much back and forth between yourself and the donor. Either you are negotiating just the figure, or you are negotiating the language of the project and all of that. So there are so many things that you are going to get involved in. And then after that, after evaluating the markets, then you actually identify, so it's evaluation and then identification of the potential sources. And then we move on to now preparing the actual fundraising plan, right? And the fundraising plan here is a whole lot of things now, talking about, where are you going to start? How are you going to do it? Who is going to go with you for making these asks? How long is this going to be? And so forth and so on. So there's a section where, again, we'll talk about that. But at that stage of the cycle, you have to do the fundraising plan. At this point, you have not even gone out to ask for money. You are still internally sorting your house. You are cleaning your house. And then you have to prepare a communications plan. Why is a communications plan important? Or maybe let me phrase it differently. How many of you have a communications plan in your departments or as an institution? I know you might have the Ministry of Information and what, but internally, do you have a communications plan? Yeah.
Is it taking the project to the donors? Is it what you mean? Right?
It's more than that. Taking the project to donors is just solicitation. Communications plan is like, okay, so by communications plan, we're talking about several elements to it. So let's say your project is around, let's say, upgrading the airport. Let's go back to that one, right? You have to convince the citizens why it is important to upgrade the airport, right? So that's number one. You are doing it for the citizens. So that means the citizens must, first and foremost, know what the current problem is with the airport. What will be the benefits of upgrading it? So that just that component requires you to communicate with the citizens in one form or the other. You can decide on the tools. It could be your social media, it could be newspaper, it could be radio, and so forth and so on. So that's one element, just getting the political buy-in of your citizens and whoever is involved. We move to the next stage. You now want to, let's say you have gone on to identify the donors. You now want to communicate what this project is about. So you have to devise a way of making it. So you have a big document that you normally produce internally. But remember, donors are not going to read that whole big document, right? So you have to break it now into small pieces, communicable pieces, so that it makes it easier for the donor. So what you do, you can produce a small pamphlet, right? A brochure just describing the project and its outcomes. So that's number one. You can do a newsletter, just talking about that. And when you go to the donor, you pull out the brochure, you pull out the newsletter, you show them, right? You can do infographics, right? So you are breaking down the project into easy, accessible ways for a donor to understand without necessarily having to read the entire document, right? Website updates and all of that. So that's on the popularization of the project itself, the scope and what it seeks to do. There are outcomes, right? You have started implementing the project. You want the donor to follow, to go along with you. But you also want the citizens to go along with you. You also want to attract more donors, possibly, right? So you have to communicate the results. You have to communicate the outcomes, right? So how do you do that again? You have to think about a plan around that, and so forth and so on, right? So that's what I mean by communications plan. So you realize here that your communications plan will change per project. Your communication plan will change per project. The tools might still be the same, the strategies might be the same, but your plan will change depending on a project, because you're not communicating the same thing for all the projects. So this is different from your Ministry of Information and Communication or whatever. I'm talking about you internally as a unit. Do you have something that helps you to sell this, right? Are we clear? Looks like people are a bit... If you don't have one, when you go back, develop one. Yes, please.
Does a communication plan has stakeholders whom you are supposed to talk to? Or does it have that stakeholders?
So you're talking about your audience. Yeah, you definitely need your audience. You definitely need your audience. So your audience could be citizens. If it is citizens, you are going to communicate in a particular way. If it is a donor, you are going to communicate in a particular way, right? So you have to map out your audiences in a communications plan. Otherwise, you are just talking. You are just talking and we are not hearing. And many people talk and we don't hear.
So meaning a communication plan can be different communication plan according to your the target market.
It's exactly that. That's why I said each project might require a different communications plan, because the techniques, the tools might still remain the same, but the messaging might change depending on the audience. So in this case, we are talking about a communications plan in relation to fundraising, right? You want to convince the donor that this is a worth cause to support. And the donor wants to know, how can I trust you? How can I believe you? How can I? And then you pull out all this communication material, including at times potential testimonials that come from beneficiaries, right? You might have done an evaluation last year of another project, and you want to use that to the donor to say, actually, we are the best to support, and this is what we did last year. And based on an independent evaluation, this is what came out of it, right? You are selling your track record to the donor. But you can also bring testimonials as part of maybe your outreach, part of your newsletter, and the donor realizes that actually you are in touch with the communities, you are in touch with your beneficiaries. You are not one of those who say they fly in and fly out. You are in touch, and they can actually prove that somebody actually benefited from this. And in those who say they are doing economics, there's something called the glow effect. Donors give because at times they want to just feel good after giving. How many of you feel good after giving? And some of them are selfish. Some of them are selfish reasons. You just feel good after giving. So you should think about that even when you're approaching donors. Some of them will give you because after giving, they will feel that they've done something worthwhile and they feel good about it. It's a glow effect. Others might be propelled by the situation and so forth and so on. Some might give for tax considerations, right? So all these are important, but your communications plan is very, very important. And then you activate the players. We talked about involvement of the different constituency members. Now it's time to activate them. You collect. So all this time you're collecting dots. You're collecting dots, right? And then at this time you are connecting dots. You start activating, right? You start activating. And then you solicit. Solicitation means you are now going to ask for money. You have everything sorted out, you have identified your need, you have validated your needs, you have defined your objectives, you have identified key players, you have validated everything, and then you have done even your communications plan, and then now you are ready to go and ask for money. Now you approach Ntabise, she's the donor. Now that's a whole ball game altogether. How to approach her and ask her for money. It's a whole ball game. I don't just go to her and say, I need money. I have to think about the trip itself. I have to plan for it, right? If it is an in-person trip, I have to first know who is this donor? What are her giving trends? What has this donor given to before? And there are tools that you can use to track the history of giving of each donor. You have to know. If they always give to education, why do you think this time around they will give to climate change? So you have to know their history of giving. What are their interests? What moves them? Right? What moves them? But you also have to know their affordability. If I'm going there with a $2 billion request, am I going to put the entire $2 billion at their table, or I'm going to put a particular amount at their table? What is their financial status like today? So you have to understand. A lot of donors are undergoing a lot of challenges right now due to COVID and the lack of economic performances. So at times you may not really be in a position to ask for the same amount of money that you would have asked 3-4 years ago. You have to know that before you go there. You have to also know what are the kind of points that I should talk to the donor about, right? Let's say I'm an EFF member here in South Africa, and I'm going to a donor who is supporting maybe they say the ANC or the DA. Do you think talking politics would be good for me in that table? I have to avoid politics because that will take us into another debate away from the focus. The focus is money. I'm here for money, right? My point is, when you then go there, you prepare in terms of what are you going to talk about? What are you going to take along? Are you taking the entire strategy? Are you taking only a brochure? Are you taking the budget? Who is going to make the presentation, right? If you are taking 4 people, is it all 4 going to speak, or is just one person? If it's one person going to speak, then why are the other 3 there? Right? We have seen this, right? The CEO or whoever minister comes along with 4 people. You all sit in the room, but only one person speaks. So why are the other 3 there? Right? So you have to think about these things because the donor is sitting there making judgments about you. They are making a judgment about. So if you take 3 people, make sure that they each say something. It might just be a short thing, but they must say something. Otherwise, you don't just take people for them to just go and sit there and do nothing. Right? But you must also be very clear about what they are going to say. Right? Be clear about what they are going to say. Because some people shoot from the hip. You know those people? When you say we shoot from the hip, what do we say? There's a particular language that you use in fundraising, and you measure the climate, the temperature in the room. You don't want people who just shoot from the hip, right? The deal might be going very well until somebody shoots from the hip, and then it derails everything, right? So, but as a team, you know each other. You know each other. The 3 of you from the suit, you work for the same ministry, so you know each other, right? You know who should say what in public and who should say what in an official thing. Among the 3 of you, you know that, right? No? You do. You get my point. Not everyone must be saying everything or anything. There must be plan around that. And then you are able to anticipate rejection. Anticipate rejection. How many of you have been rejected? Even in your personal lives? In your personal lives, I mean, all of us have been rejected in one form or the other, and it's painful, right? You must anticipate rejection in fundraising. You go and ask and the donor says, not now, or not at all, right? Anticipate that, because at that moment when the donor says, no, not now, there's going to be a quiet moment. It's going to be very uncomfortable. Anticipate that. Have a comeback. Have a comeback. If the donor says not now, it's okay. Would it be fine if we came back after 6 months and so forth and so on, right? You dilute the environment. If you say no, okay, will it be fine if you maybe connected us with some of your colleagues and some of your peers, those that you might know who fund in this area? And if at any point in time you change your strategy, should we be able to come back to you, right? So anticipate that moment of anxiety and comfortability, right? Rejection is normal. What happens when you're rejected? You normally get somebody who accepts you, right? Even in your personal lives, that's what happens. So even in donor funding, think of it that way. But solicitation is also a tact. So we normally role play this thing. So normally these things happen on boardrooms, coffee shops, right? Mostly boardrooms, coffee shops. So let's say you are meeting, because most of the high net worth individuals and some of these big foundations, you would meet them usually in coffee shops or in their penthouses and stuff like that, right? Or playing golf, right? Those are the specific places where you find them. There's specific places where you actually, in fact, you should know, there's a study report that comes every year. It's called Africa Wealth Report. Every year, Africa Wealth Report. It details the luxurious ways in which donors, high net worth individuals live, where they buy, their interests, and where to find them, right? And then, of course, then it tells you how much they are worth and all that. So if you are looking for a particular high net worth individual, you should know where they hang around, right? Now, I wanted to demonstrate this. By solicitation, it's not just about putting the proposal there and saying we are looking for 100 billion. You have to think about the moment and also how you are going to do it. Timing is important. Not every time is good to ask. So let's say you are in a coffee shop and the two of you are sitting there, or 4 or 5, whatever. When do you think you should make the ask? When the donor is sipping a coffee, or before, or after? I'm just giving you a practical life experience. You are having coffee and you are about to ask a donor a big amount. You are looking at the donor. Either before they touch their cup, do you ask them? Or do you wait for them to sip the coffee and then you ask? Or do you wait until they've done with their coffee? Let's see. Why do you say after? Where's the mic? Oh, okay. This is a practical thing. Why do you say after?
I think I'll wait until he finishes sipping, because maybe, I don't know, but I think it will be the right moment.
So you're going with intuition?
Yeah.
Okay. I think there's... okay, there's a mic there. Sorry. Yeah?
I'd say at the moment when they're taking a sip, because there would be that moment of contemplation when he's enjoying the savoriness of the tea, and then I pop in my request.
Okay. At the point of sipping, what if he chokes? So you say it, then it's a big amount, and then he chokes. Okay. Let's see. You can sit on.
I think I agree with her that after he has just sipped in his coffee, it means he will be satisfied with what he just had, and probably the question will go with now his concept he's fulfilling with the concept, and I believe it's when after he had just felt the taste of the coffee, he's satisfied, so it might be the good time to execute it.
Okay. Anyway, I was just demonstrating something practical. So life is complex. Life is complex. Each moment will present you with different choices. So whatever we are going to say is just principles. You judge the moment. Otherwise, anything can go. But here are standard things about this. So firstly, you must make sure that if you do happen to meet in a restaurant, you must make sure that you are in touch with even the people who will be serving you, right? You are in touch with them so that you can arrange the amount of time that they need to give you to have your conversation undisturbed. You know what happens in restaurants. You're about to say something, then the waitress or waiter is there. And you remember you're asking for money here. Yeah? You're coming to ask for money. You also don't want somebody listening in and whatever. So you need to make sure that the donor does not care, right? But you want to manage the environment in such a way that there's not much disturbance. You need to have a free flow of your presentation and all of that. So you might want to ask them to maybe not serve you your coffee at a particular moment, maybe start with maybe water or something, and then you do your thing, and then they can come, right? That's one way of doing it. The other is if they serve you coffee, you make sure that you do the talking while the donor is sipping their coffee, right? And once they are done, or you see that they've given you a pause, then you make the ask. Immediately after making the ask, that's when you take your own coffee.
So it's after.
Right? So that's one way of doing it. But like I'm saying, there are the moment will determine how you react. But you must manage certain environmental circumstances that might disturb your presentation. Right? So it looks like a small thing, but that could easily just derail everything. So soliciting is really now about you asking for the money. And like I said, not everyone can ask or should ask or make an ask. So in one of the exercises we are going to do, you will have to, as an institution, identify who among you has access to the donor, who among you stands a better chance of making an ask and getting a positive outcome. It doesn't follow that the CEO all the time should be the person making an ask, which is why at times the CEO can actually ask a board member, can ask somebody else to come with them, because they know that the donor will feel comfortable with this person making the ask as opposed to the CEO. The person making the ask will make the ask and then say, the CEO is here, he or she can give the technical details, but essentially we are looking for this amount of money, right? So CEOs must also know that, or head of departments must know that they are not always the ones who must make an ask, because at times you will not be given money because the donor has a problem with the CEO, right? So you have to do these exercises as well. And then the last part is called stewardship. So by stewardship is how do you keep the donor always happy? I told you, donors need attention. You must keep the donor happy all the time. If you want them to come back and renew the grant or fund again, then you must keep them happy. How do you do that? By performing. You must perform. You do what you said you were going to do in your proposal. Perform. You keep the donor happy by performing. Make the donor shine. Remember, the donor is not implementing the project. They can only shine by saying, we are funding so and so, and this is what they are doing. Great work, right? So that's number one, performance. Number two, updated. It looks like I don't have sound anymore. You must always keep the donor updated. Always. Update the donor on so many things. One is changes in an institution, changes in your team, changes in the project. Don't wait until the donor picks it on the grapevine. Be the first to let the donor know there are these changes, blah, blah, blah. Keep the donor happy by updating them on results. So, technically speaking, once you sign an agreement, there will be times when you are supposed to submit technical reports. Those are just formalities. In resource mobilization, don't depend on those. Those are formalities. You are expected to submit a report anyway, but that doesn't build a relationship with the donor. What builds a relationship with the donor is in between conversations, in between updates, formal and informal, that you make with the donor. Don't wait for next year when you're supposed to submit a report for you to talk to the donor. In between, find ways. I am constantly on the call with my donors. Every week I probably speak to 2 or 3 of them. At times just calling and saying, how are you today? Huh? Just that is enough. Or calling to say, we have a meeting coming up next week, would you be willing to attend? Right? Or setting up a coffee. Can we meet for coffee so that we can just catch up on certain developmental issues, the environment, politics, economics, all these things, right? You need to do that. That way you build what I called interpersonal trust. So when tomorrow you have a problem, the donor is the first one to assist you. Yeah? Okay, so that's stewardship. You must make sure that your donors stay. It's so easy to keep a donor than to find a new donor. You look surprised. It's so easy to keep a donor than to find a new donor. Like friends, it's so easy to keep friends than to find new friends. Partners, it's so easy to keep a partner than to find a new partner. So the same principles apply here. Okay, so this is the cycle in fundraising. Say.
In terms of soliciting, the example you gave me sitting over coffee, but I'm coming from, it's more advisable on formal writing.
Yeah.
So what do you advise? What's the best?
Okay, so we mean when you are proposals and stuff?
Yes.
Okay, the same principle will apply. Let me explain why. You see, of course, depending on where you sit and how you want to work, you must also think about your return on investment. So personally, I don't write proposals until I have gotten to a point where I know that this proposal will probably go through, right? So that means I must first cultivate. You see, when you talk about cultivation, I think we'll come to it. I must first cultivate. We spoke about cultivation earlier. I first cultivate relations with the potential donor. So that's why we have some of those coffee meetings and all those things. And then to a point where the donor says, you know what, we have a call coming out, maybe next week or next month. You know, once the call comes out, put in your proposal. Or remember, donors also operate differently. Some you can solicit. They can solicit, right? Some is unsolicited. In other words, they just approach you and say to you, we've got this project or we've got this amount of money that we want to spend. Are you able to put together a proposal and so on? So it depends. But at the end of the day, I don't write a proposal unless I'm very sure that my proposal will get the required attention. Otherwise, you spend your time just writing proposals and getting nothing in return. So you must invest in that friend raising. I go back to the term that I use, friend raising. Now, let's assume that you have gotten to that stage and then now you are writing a proposal. Again, I think it's tomorrow or the day after you are going to go through writing, but you write the proposal and usually there are different ways. One, they might ask you to just submit it online, right? So you submit your proposal online assuming you have had moments to talk to the donor, either through, remember, by donor, I'm not talking about one individual. By donor here, I'm talking about the institution, right? So let's say it's the African Development Bank, who is your donor. There might be different people within the bank that you might talk to, that might help you from a technical point of view. Some might even help you from an access point of view, so that by the time you submit your proposal, you are guaranteed that it's going to be reviewed. You may not be guaranteed of a positive outcome, but at least you know it's going to be reviewed, right? So you send it in formally, but what do you do after you have sent it in? You don't just send the proposal and just leave it there for 6 months, because it can stay there for 6 months, 1 year, unattended, right? Because at times it could have been rejected by the system. So that's number one. The system can just reject it. These days, you know that these days most of the selection of proposals and shortlisting is not done by us people, it's done by machines, right? So if your proposal doesn't tick particular words that the system has configured, it doesn't get to the human person to look at it, just gets thrown away. So your proposal could be one of those, or it could go through, but because maybe it's not urgent or whatever it is there. So there are things that you do after submission of the proposal, which is why that element of fundraising is important, because now you are able to follow up on the proposal to say, we submitted a proposal on this day, when could we be expecting this, and so some of them will be formal conversations, some are informal conversations. You need to engage in all of those. But if you had invested in that coffee or golf, depending on whatever you are cycling, for example, if your donor, that's why I said you must start your donor. If your donor is a cyclist, then you go to the cycling, you start cycling yourself. Yeah? You start cycling because you want to catch that big donor. And the only place where you can catch them is to join them in their interest. And their interest is cycling. You cycle. You have conversations while cycling. The idea is to get to know each other at a human level. It makes it easier when you are now dealing with your technical documents that are submitted. So you still have to invest in that chief in one way or the other. The writing is just the formality. Yeah. Sir. Oh yeah, sorry.
Stewardship. Now, once the project is sorted out, details have been finalized, and the project is ready for implementation. Now, is it a good thing to organize like an event to do some media coverage with the event before stewardship?
Okay, so again, this is part of your communications plan. When do you plan to communicate about your project? You communicate at different levels and different phases. So for example, you can communicate at the level when a contract has been signed, right? And you have seen all these media press releases, the government of Swaziland or the government of Eswatini received so much money for, right? So that's one level of communication. At the point of signing an agreement, you communicate, everyone gets to know, and all eyes are on you. Yeah? You move on, maybe the first big launch of the project, you launch the project, you communicate again, press conference, press release, blah, 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 right? Do interviews, everything, that's there. Move on, maybe, one of your partners maybe does present something somewhere or they write something, again, it's part of communication. Reviews, you do the same. Major milestone, when you reach milestones, you make big noise around it. You are creating visibility. You are creating popularity, but you're also creating a footprint, which is very important in fundraising. So communication is at different stages of your project. Okay, anything on this cycle? I want to move to something else now. I know we've got friends. Yes, please go ahead.
Sorry, we came in late, but still, I think I would like to take you back. I think to point number. Is it?
Okay, just mention it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to check. Number 7. Evaluate gifts markets.
Yeah.
Can you just go back, maybe?
Okay, to just explain that, we're gonna come back to this when we talk about major gifts. But basically, what we're saying is that this is a fundraising cycle. Before you go out to ask for money, you must do each of these stages. So there's a point number 3 where you analyze the market. So analyzing the market, you are looking at the entire ecosystem around where you could potentially go to ask for money. So you probably map corporates, and under corporates you will have all sorts of donors or potentials. You map individuals, you map bilaterals, you map multilaterals, blended finance, instruments, everything there. And then you come to the evaluation of gift markets. Now there's a technique that I'm going to talk about. You are now looking at, I'm looking for 100 billion. That's my budget that I'm looking for, $100 billion. Now you have to evaluate now the gift markets. In other words, where are you going to get this 100 billion, right? There's a formula that I'm going to talk about, but we are basically saying to get this 100 billion, I don't want to be chasing thousands of donors. I don't want to do that. So you're evaluating who of the thousands of those donors are likely to give you the biggest amount. And technically, we'll come back to this. We say 10% of your donors must give you 60% of your budget, right? You are evaluating the gift market now. Of the 50 donors that I have in my donor base, 10% of them must give me 60% of what I'm looking for, right? So you are narrowing to just 2 or 3 of the donors in the pool that you have, and they must give you 60% of what you are looking for. So if you are doing the airport thing, it means you are looking at big donors like your infrastructure banks and all of those. They give you 60% of what you are looking for. Then you say the next 20% of the donors of that pool must give you 20% of what you are looking for. So you are sitting with 80% of the funding from 30% of your donors. That leaves you with 70% of donors in the pool only giving you 20% of your budget. Does that make sense? So in terms of time allocation, time management, stewardship, you are dealing with 30%. 30% gives you 80% of what you need. And then the rest, 70%, give you 20%. And that's where normally we spend most of our time in the 70%. And we get 20%. That's what we normally do. All of us, we spend so much time spreading our wings so thin, chasing this 70% of the donors to only give us 20%. Whereas if you do it as a science, you follow this, you identify your 10%, they give you 60%. Already you are dealing with 2 or 3 donors. In terms of reporting and all these other things, you are focused. Because each donor, like I said, will require its own report. Whether they're giving you $100, they're giving you 1 million, they will all require the same attention. Right? You can't say, you know, I will only give you 5 minutes because you give me $100. There's another one who gives me 1 million. You don't do that because the person who's giving you $100 tomorrow might give you 1 million. They might be giving you that amount just to test, to see how you perform, which is why we then upgrade them as you go along. Does that answer you say? Okay. I wanted to move now to this other. Okay, so we've talked about the cycle, what you do internally to get yourself ready. In other words, how do How do you get the vehicle fit for purpose? We have talked about that. Now, where do you go, right? Where do you go? You are going to have a session with Michelle and maybe Lufeyo and others on this, but just to give you broadly the landscape. There's a whole world out there where you can get funding. A whole world out there. So, firstly, is foundations. What is the biggest foundation right now in the world? The biggest foundation right now in the world. Sorry? The Bill and Melinda Gates. I think probably them, they have been for quite some time, they probably are, but there are other new ones now. What are the other two that you know of? Big foundations that can give mega amounts of money, talking billions. Sorry? Did I hear somebody here? No? You are searching, you are Googling. When you leave this session, instead of Googling, we would say CAPSI that, right? You know, CAPSI is our institution. Instead of saying Googling, you say CAPSI that, right? You CAPSI that. So what's the other foundation? You said Bill and Melinda Gates. Yes, that's true. What's the other foundation? Ford Foundation. Okay, so this is how it works. You are right. In Africa, probably that's the latest, well, not latest, like outdated statistics. Of all the American foundations, the Bill and Melinda Gates provided, or used to, maybe still does, it used to provide 70% of the overall funding from American foundations to Africa. 70% comes from the Bill and Melinda Gates of all the American foundations. And then the second biggest foundation in Africa from America is the Ford Foundation. So she's right in that regard. But the Ford Foundation only provides 4% of the overall funding coming to Africa. So from 70 to 4%. Bill Gates, number one, 70, Ford, number two, 4%. Right? So it is the second biggest American, but not the biggest foundation. There are new ones, MasterCard Foundation. How many of you know of the MasterCard Foundation? Okay. So you must look out, check the MasterCard Foundation. They are one of the biggest donors right now, funding in technology, youth. In fact, their strategy is Africa Works, and they fund financial inclusion, youth employment, dignified jobs, health. In fact, they bankrolled a lot of the Africa CDC work during the pandemic. The point is, we have to do an exercise on big foundations in Africa. These could be international foundations funding in Africa or local foundations. Right? Now, let's cast our eyes across the continent. Who are the biggest local foundations that you have heard of? Africans. Sorry? Mo Ibrahim. So Mo Ibrahim is one of them. I don't know if he's the biggest, but he's one of them. So Mo Ibrahim, they support governance work, and they also do like fellowships, especially at the ADB, ECA, among others. But they fund this governance index, right? So that's Mo Ibrahim, coming out of telecommunications sector. Who else? Who are your wealthy people in Africa? Who are your high net worth individuals? So if we were to say, give us 10 high net worth individuals, who would you name? Tony Elumelu, yes, got this 100 billion or 100 million fund that he does with youth across the continent. It's called Africapitalism, right? He funds entrepreneurs across different countries in Africa. Tony Elumelu is one from UPA, right, from the banking sector, and he did that. Who is the other one? Motsepe Foundation, right? Somotsepe is the other one. They've given billions and billions towards COVID, towards Ebola, and other streams of work around education and stuff. Who is the other one? Okay, let's look into your countries now. Tanzania. What's that? Okay, what do they do? He's a billionaire. He has a foundation as well. Okay. We used to know the other one who died. What's his name? Mengi. Mengi, yeah. Yeah. And Ali Mufruki. Yeah. But he's late as well. Yeah, okay. So at least we can identify some in Tanzania. There's a young guy there. I'm trying to think what his name is. A very young guy. Yeah. So you've got many in Tanzania, right? Lesotho, high net worth individual. What's that? Okay. Does he have a foundation?
I don't think he has a foundation. He has funded somehow.
Okay.
I don't know. You guys will help me. I don't think Matekane has a foundation per se, called Matekane Foundation. I know he has a group, a Matekane group of business associates who have come together to form this group, and they do provide funding to some of the projects, either government or private sector projects.
Okay. So because we're out of time, I wanted you to, as part of this exercise, to when you're back at home or tonight or whenever, just give yourself some time and understand your landscape. Who is the richest in your countries, right? The wealthy. What do they give towards, right? What is their funding history? What are their interests? Do your projects qualify to be presented to them? And so forth. So you can look at them through the perspective of an individual who is high net worth, right? Because at times they give from their own pocket. But some of them have actually set up foundations, and therefore you have to also go through their foundations to understand the areas that they want to support. And some of them do collaborations with governments, right? In education, in health, and all of that. So look at that. So you have international foundations, you have local foundations, you have high net worth individuals who are operating in the continent. Some are operating in their own countries, some do regional grant making or regional support. So look at that. And then you've got bilaterals. These ones I think you're all familiar with. So this is government to government support, right? So you've got the development arms of the various governments, DFID for the UK, USAID for the US, and all of those. Again, they do lots of funding to government and to government departments in specific areas. And then you've got multilaterals. These ones also you are familiar with. These are your World Banks, your Africa Development Bank, your IMFs, and all of those. These are your UN agencies. These are multilaterals. Again, as you are designing projects, identify who does what and who can support what. So multilaterals will support specific components, and they would require specific processes to be in place, right? They might want to assess whether your pillars of governance are fit, they are strong. So there's something called a pillar assessment that most multilaterals would want you to go through, right? And all of that. And then you've got to look at corporates. In each and every country, there are different corporates that are giving back to society through their corporate social responsibility or through investments, different forms of investments. So as governments, most of you have got government companies that invest in certain private sector entities. So again, think about that as you are designing your projects. And then we have already spoken about the high net worth individuals. And then we've got these blended forms of finance between the public-private partnerships. And then at some point I wanted you to think about what is contained in the SADC resource mobilization framework. And I don't know whether you have come across that framework. No? Okay, if we do have time, I will talk about it. I wrote that framework actually a couple of years back. And that framework really identifies where SADC could raise resources from. It's almost a replica of what we are saying here, although there were other areas where we're saying they can be innovative and raise funding from tourism, for example, a tourism levy. There was also a fuel levy and so forth and so on, right? And I think you are aware that the African Union at one point wanted to charge 2% levy on each and every product that you trade in. And so those are some of the things that we had put in there. But it's a product that is, I think it's actually uploaded on Ulwazi. We should be able to find it there. So we will stop here. This is kind of a quick scan of the landscape. But like I said, Michelle, Lufeo, and others are going to go deeper into this. It's lunchtime. I'm told it's lunchtime. So let's go for lunch. When we come, we'll look at the other elements of the fundraising techniques. We are going to look at the 6 rights that I talked about. We'll move faster because I also want to cover some of the campaigns that you can start thinking about. Okay, lunchtime. We are back here at, is it 1?
Yeah,
108. Okay.
so it will be 1:08.
No, let's come back at 1. Okay. Yeah, we'll see. Remember, I don't live at the hotel like you. I live in Pretoria, so I will to go. Okay, let's go for lunch so that we can come back. At least let's try to come at 1. I take the point that we can start at 8 past, but you know, if we say come at 1, then it means by the time people get here at 8 past, it will be beyond that. So let's come back at 1.